Hello and welcome to this special edition of Inside the Piranha Club, where we will be speaking to Alex Jacques, the voice of F1 TV and Channel 4, and now author, as he's written the brilliant new book, Grid to Glory, which looks at these 75 milestones in 75 years of Formula One. Some you may agree with, some you may not. We will get into all of that in this special edition. I'm Rebecca Clancy.
And I'm Ben Hunt.
Alex, thank you so much for joining us in what is an incredibly long season and still the triple header to go. Congratulations on the book, Grid to Glory. It's a brilliant, brilliant read. I say read, I confess I've turned into a bit of an audiobook geek. I listen to all books now. But it's brilliant. But I have to ask you, 75 milestones in the 75 years of Formula One, how did you choose them?
With extreme difficulty. So coming up with about 40, really simple, right? And then you end up with about 120. And then you realise that you've biased them all towards the era that you loved. And you're like, oh, there's absolutely nothing from the 1960s in here. This isn't going to work. And so the whole thing became a bit of a labour of love because there were some gaps. I mean, I've, been doing Formula One league commentary for a while now. So I do try to fill in the gaps, and if I see a stat, I try to actually have the understanding behind it, like if we're going to mention a name from the past and so on and so forth. But yeah, when you're doing it properly, like you guys know, with the written word, you actually have to know your facts inside out. So the amount of research was frankly ridiculous. And yeah, if I'd known it at the start, probably would have written on another subject. But there we go. There's 75 moments as a result.
I always find that it's quite surprising. You think you know a subject, but you learn so much more, don't you, when you start digging into the past? What were the things that surprised you?
I found Colin Chapman's influence, so the founder and designer at Lotus, which, imagine that now, that you had a founder and designer, just seems completely impossible, another era. But I found his influence in terms of having a big breakthrough, then everyone else catches up, maybe even perfects the ideas to a greater extent, and then needs another breakthrough, and seemed obsessed with the breakthroughs. It seemed obsessed with the quantum leaps rather than consistently running at the front. And just a fascinating character. A little bit of darkness there as well, because there was an open reputation that Lotus cars were slightly more fragile than everyone else. Yep. You had drivers advising other drivers, hey, don't go for the Lotus seat, which is a real edge that we just don't have today. So I found him just absolutely fascinating as a character, and almost trying not to draw conclusions on his character and just relay the stories. But that was fascinating. And then obviously the safety journey, where the one consistent theme I think throughout is that the drivers are heroes from 1950 to present day. It's always about the drivers and the personality in the middle of the technology. But just the fact that you had so many brutal moments where you would tell the story vividly of these amazing personalities and then they'd be gone. And yeah, it's stark going back through and reading the contemporary accounts of something like Jim Clark's death, of how shaken the drivers are for an era that was, built on stoicism, and they're visibly shaken by the events that have taken place. Because if Jim Clark could die, they could all die. And they knew that, obviously, with what they were racing. But when that peripheral thought is placed front and center, you can see how much it affected them. So, yeah, fascinating to go back into the old days.
It is a bit of a history book, isn't it? When I was listening to it, and there's so, like you say, you gravitate towards the era that you know and that when you started following it. And obviously that's much more recent for us. But then, listening to the book, I was really taken by even stories that I didn't know about, having worked in this sport for long enough. And it's so complicated because within this book, you have to get in the personalities, the safety element, as you say. You've got the engineering side. It's a great chapter, or a couple of chapters actually, including Adrian Newey. And it's, we all know about the Drive to Survive era, which gets its own chapter as well, rightly so. And it's kind of introducing all of these new fans to the sport, to what was an unbelievable sport pre-2019, let's be honest. Started in 1950 as we know it now. A brilliant chapter on Bernie Ecclestone. He kind of created the sport as we see it today. But I cannot imagine, that list growing out to 120, how you then whittle it down, what were some of the favourite stories that you came across? Not just that necessarily surprised you, but what were some of your favourite chapters to write?
I absolutely love the one on the drivers' strike. So the drivers' strike as an idea, to be honest, there was slightly longer. So one of the things that you guys would have experienced for years, and that I had forgotten from my very, very tiny stint of writing written reports for Fleet Street newspapers, was the horror of getting parts of your work chopped out. And so you got a second draft back, and I was like, oh, no, not the first part. No, I really like that one. And you find yourself mourning work that you really liked. But the driver's strike, the initial idea was to liken it to what would happen in present day if they went out on strike. But I just love the idea that you get to the start of the 1982 season, and they've put a really weird clause in the contract, which meant the teams could fire the drivers, but the drivers were still attached to the teams. So essentially, the drivers, if they didn't behave themselves, would be on the bench with no way to do anything about it for the remainder of the season, potentially even 2 seasons. So obviously that wasn't going to fly. Nicky Lauda was one of the few drivers to read the small print, and so he took them all off to the Sunnyside Hotel. And they barricaded themselves in a conference room or a ballroom. It wasn't clear. And not only did they stay in there, they stayed the night in there. And there were great stories of team managers bringing down a couple of local heavies and trying to beat the door down. And just the idea that happens. You imagine we go to Melbourne next year and the drivers go on strike and barricade themselves in a local hotel conference room. It seems impossible.
Well,
and so that was a great one to tell.
I was going to interject here because it wasn't that long ago we were in Saudi Arabia and the drivers almost taking the strike. And they were all.
But they didn't. That's the difference.
They didn't, yeah. And they were all locked in that room, and there was obviously a potential for that. And I also remember, German Grand Prix, probably about 2012, 2013, when all the tyres were exploding randomly, and there was a potential threat to strike then due to the safety fears. And so it could happen again.
It's not impossible. But I think the way that the fact that they all jumped on the bus, I mean, it just felt like another era. And I love the fact that Nicky Lauda was the ringleader, and just things like you had a driver on the piano playing dramatic music every single time the person negotiated came back from the track, and it's like, right, this is the deal that they've offered. Dun, 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 dun. Top farce, and I love it when it gets a bit farcical.
I have to ask you about the greatest overtake of all time. You gave it to Spa 2000, Häkkinen's double move on Schumacher. How many people have challenged you on this decision?
It comes up a lot, and everyone's got their favourite one, but it's very difficult to see past the idea of, and I say in the book, that's one of my favourite days in the job, is getting to talk to Mika Häkkinen about that move. I think the idea that it's at such high speed, there's a world championship on the line, and it's for a race win, I think that just adds to all of it. So there have been some wonderful moves further down the pack. I think Fernando Alonso around the outside of the 130R back in Japan 2005. There are so many. Mark Webber, I forget the year, but on Alonso, Rouge. I mean, that is, considering the accidents that Mark sometimes had, that is an unbelievable risk to take.
That's a hold your breath one, isn't it?
It really is. But honestly, I think considering what was on the line, considering that a couple laps before he'd nearly been put in the wall at 200 miles an hour, and if you consider that you've only got to go back 5 years to Mika nearly losing his life in a race car, and that is an element, we've talked about the danger in the early decades of Formula One. We'd become a little bit used to it being safe, but Mika knew the pain of having to recover from a huge crash. And to be nearly put in the wall the lap before and then come back and produce that, either side of Zonta, who had the best view, and I imagine the most terrified view of, don't want to take out Schumacher, don't want to take out Häkkinen, because it's the end of your career. Make no mistake about it, if you take out a front runner in that moment, you're not coming back to the next season. So the fact that he pulled it off, I think with all of that context, makes it the greatest move for me.
I don't want to give away too many spoilers from the book, so I won't. But there's one other chapter I want to speak to you about, which is Murray Walker and the brilliant Murray Walker, because obviously as a commentator, I just want to firstly get your impressions of Murray Walker, but then also within the book you go through his Murray-isms, and they are brilliant. And I'll give you a few. There's nothing wrong with the car except it's on fire. And unless I'm very much mistaken, I am very much mistaken. He was absolutely brilliant. He was the voice of the sport. You are now taking on that mantle as the voice of F1 TV and Channel 4. How did you feel writing that chapter, knowing that, maybe one day someone's writing a chapter about you?
That's a very weird way to put it. I hadn't considered it that way. I think, for me, I just think what was interesting about Murray is obviously very popular all these years on. But I think it was impressive. I discovered Formula One when he was commentating as a kid, and I thought now as a broadcaster I'm just so impressed with the way that he could get me hooked on it and also broadcast to the masses and huge viewing figures on one channel, but then those words going around the world. So he was hugely entertaining, but I also wanted to make the point that Murray Walker's peaks are unmatched in sports broadcasting, and also wanted to make the point that everyone sees it like Murray did now. But there was you go back to the era of sports broadcasting even 10 years ago, and there was a lot of paddock police around. There was a lot of should-have scored mentality in football and rugby, and it was almost like settling scores at halftime with the ex-pros. And now, how many times do you hear, oh, it's a privilege to be here. What a wonderful occasion it is. And it is. But I think the positive slant, the glass half full, isn't this the most exciting thing? And the thing is, he wasn't selling it. He truly believed that was the pinnacle. And I think the enthusiasm, the infectious enthusiasm was genuine. And I think the genuine enthusiasm drew people in. And I think sports broadcasting as a whole has gravitated that way in recent times.
Also, the technology back then was so primitive, wasn't it? I think that was the thing, watching on probably one or two monitors and making a call. And you mentioned the Murrayisms, but of course he didn't really have much to go on, did he? Not too much information to have. So
it's a good point, Ben, because I've got, how many screens have I got in the commentary box? I've got 7 screens in the commentary box, and if I could have more, I would. But apparently we've got to be responsible with freight costs. So, so he, at points, was trackside. So his first ever commentary with James Hunt. James Hunt turns up with a bottle of Plonk, but they're by the Armco.
Those were the days.
Yeah. I mean, that is, thankfully Jolyon and DC don't do that, so my life is made somewhat easier. But yeah, that is a very good point, that the information available to commentators, even as far as the pre-90s basically, was very, very limited. Yeah,
absolutely. Just a bit on your approach to commentary, because you obviously won the Big Sports Broadcaster of the Year award in 2022. You were widely praised for your commentary of Charles Leclerc's first win in Monaco, first Monegasque to win there. That was utterly brilliant. How do you go about planning for a weekend? How much is actually involved?
There's a lot of planning. There's a lot of trying to take... The difference between doing it for a junior championship where I started, like Formula 3 or a Formula 2, and doing it with Formula 1, is that you have to do all the legwork and the groundwork yourself for Formula 3 and Formula 2. So there's a lot of research, there's a lot of anecdotal gathering, if you like. When it gets to Formula 1, you've obviously got a press conference, you've got the media sessions, you've got the pen. So you don't have to do as much gathering, but you have to do more whittling, because there's a lot of information out there, but what's the relevant information? So I'll spend the early part of the week gathering all the notes, and then I will try and break that down into 3 pieces of A4 that I have in front of me. Notes on all the drivers, and then just general talking points on the other one. And things like bullet points, like how many years has it been since a Monegasque driver has won the Monaco Grand Prix, or, for example, during Brazil, when there was a point where Max had come from the pit lane, and I was like, I know no one's ever won a Grand Prix from the pit lane. I know that, but equally, I'm just going to check it just to be 100% sure. So that's an amazing, I have to say, that's an amazing moment when you turn over the piece of paper in the comm box and you go, right, I'm just going to double check that, because if he does win this Grand Prix, and madly he's a factor to win this Grand Prix, I've got to be 100% correct. So that's what you're kind of doing. You're doing your Thursday plan, whittling it down, adding quotes that the drivers... I'm massively into quotes that explain why the drivers are having the weekends that they are. So even if it's one line, Ocon can't switch on the tyres. You've just told everyone why he's 19th. I try to have that for every single driver, and then double checking things on the laptop as we get to the middle stages of the Grand Prix. It's basically how it works.
And then for Leclerc, for example, did you have that written out and pre-prepared just in case?
No, I had some numbers. So the numbers are always what I will have. So in the box for Charles Leclerc, it was like, I think it's 93 years off the top of my head. And then, so the numbers I will write down, and the rest is anecdotal. And the thing is, people have asked me about that, about how much can you prepare. I have no idea when director Phil is going to cut to him on the last lap. I don't know if we're going to do the whole lap. I don't know if we're going to do the whole last 2 laps. I don't know if we're going to cut to him at Tabac. I don't know if we're going to cut to him at the swimming pool. So, also the audience can tell. You can't cheat a Formula One audience. You can in some other sports, I've found, but we have a very, very, very smart bunch watching us, and it wouldn't sound right if you scripted the whole thing.
I was going to say, are you Googling throughout the race while commentating to try and find some stats? Does that ever happen?
Sometimes it's more double checking. So I'm very, very fortunate in that DC has been there and done it, run at the front for a very long time. He will put us in the cockpit, and a great example of that is Budapest, when last year, when he had been in a McLaren, he had been given a team order he didn't want to follow, and he had literally lived what Lando Norris was living. And for him to open up on that, that's unbelievable. Jolyon not only has the driving experience, but has an amazing knowledge of Formula One. And actually, just adores the sport as a fan as well. So he's got amazing recall. So usually between the two of us, we've got it. But you've got to be, if you're going to go with a big stat, or if you're going to go with something that is interesting enough to tell the audience, it's got to be right. So there is a lot of double checking just for your own, because it's amazing that on air, your thought process is not as coherent as it would be if you were just having a chat like this.
It's a skill to make it look easy. Let's go back to the very, very start then. You mentioned in the book that you got into the sport at 9 years old. But how did you actually get into what you're doing now? And I should tell the listeners that once upon a time, Alex and I were colleagues at the Times. Yes. That feels like a different lifetime now. We went for a coffee and talked about F1. But we've both come a long way now. But how did you find yourself in the seat that you do now with F1 TV and Channel 4?
I should tell everyone watching, listening, that Bec actually was a proper journalist at the Times, and that I just mucked around with the video and audio team, right? And she was in conference, facing down the editor, and I was many, many seats away, just making notes. So just to clarify that, I got into local radio. I wanted to be a sports broadcaster. I love Formula One. Formula One is what I would have aimed for, but it is pretty difficult to make that work. And there aren't many racetracks in Suffolk, so you have to take any of the sport that you can get. I was very lucky that I had a sports editor there called Graham McLaughlin, and he lent me some radio equipment. And then what happens if you're good on local radio, you then get asked by other local radio stations to be the person to go to games they can't be bothered to go to. So for a lot of the northern stations, they didn't want to send someone to a Colchester game, for example, or a Norwich game, for example. And so I became the go-to if they didn't want to send anyone. And it's amazing that you get a lot of opportunities by saying yes over and over again. Not a lot of people wanted to cover Cardiff and Swansea matches, so I did a lot of very long train journeys to Cardiff and thoroughly enjoyed it. And you just get the experience of being in the press box. You're learning off every press conference question. I was filming press conferences as well. You're learning so much from the people around you, and it was like a mini master's course, if you like, because you were like, that's a great question, that got nothing, why did that get nothing, why did that get a bite? And you're not making any money off it, but I loved doing it. I then then moved from a radio station to to the Times, and I was there on the audio and video desk and loved doing that and loved the newsroom, but that was the 9 to 5. And then at the weekend I tried to keep my hand in, and then eventually you get to the point where you're like, man, this is costing me quite a lot of money, and mates are going, are you coming to the party at the weekend? And I'm like, no, I'm off to go and cover the Colchester game, which is not always the most glamorous of sentences. And then I saw that Will Buxton was giving up the GP2 gig, and I sent everything that I had accumulated over those 5 years to the producers at Formula One, hoping that I would one day get on their radar. And they said, do you want to go to Bahrain? And I was like, oh no, this has got a little bit advanced for what I thought would happen. And I was thoroughly out of my depth for 2015, but I clung on for dear life, and they let me have another go the next year, and it's been pretty good ever since.
Fantastic. From Colchester to Bahrain.
Yeah.
So it was a real case of learning on the job.
Yeah, it was, and specifically
in the F1 sense.
Yeah, because the way that they used to do it, I was, as you know, if you cover it for radio, and I was doing radio all the time, or written reports, you're in the grandstand, and so all of your natural volume and everything that comes with that is created by the crowd noise around you. So you can never be at the wrong level of excitement. And then Formula One used to do their commentary from the back of the gallery, their on-site gallery, which used to be far bigger than it is now. They've thinned it down in recent times, but they still have an on-site presence. And then at the back, they would just have a microphone, and that's where you would go. So it's pretty intimidating because you had all the replay operators surrounding you. You had the director, you had the producers. Everyone's like, well, go on then. You said you could commentate. Let's hear you do it. But it's a very difficult thing commentating in a TV gallery to commentating in a grandstand. So, yeah, that first year was odd. And then 2016, they put me in a commentary box, and it's been all right ever since.
Wonderful. I was going to say, I remember doing football matches at Layer Road in Colchester.
Yeah.
And heading out that way. And obviously I did the Swanseas and Cardiffs too. That was partly because of I didn't really have a patch that I was working on. When I'd come back from F1 races, it would be like, could you go down there and do it? And kind of loved it. But you are right. You learn so much, don't you, when you're in that press conference environment.
Yeah, just purely because you've got to see. I mean, you'll have seen it as well. You live and die on what you bring back. And if you're doing an unfancied match, or a match that's going to be, smaller word count, if you don't come back with a good quote, your word count could easily get reduced. So you learn pretty quickly, if you want any prominence, you're going to have to get a bite out of the manager.
Indeed.
I love all aspiring F1 journalists or commentators now are wondering how to get themselves down to Colchester currently.
Where it starts.
Okay, so let's move to current day, because it is quite the season that we are having. We are speaking to Alex just ahead of the Vegas Grand Prix. 3 races remaining, coming thick and fast. We go to Vegas, then we're in Qatar for the sprint race and the main race, and then we finish up in Abu Dhabi. Just as a general view, Alex, how have you seen this season?
Confounding, to be honest. I had an expectation at the start of the year that we'd be in for a sort of Lando coronation. I think a lot of people expected that. I thought he'd get a really fast start, build a championship lead, and sort of manage his way to the finish. What we got was Oscar stealing that out of his hands. And then I have to admit, I was absolutely astounded at the leap he was able to make from season 2 to season 3. And yeah, like a jaw dropper, genuinely, to go up against, obviously Max didn't have the car at the start of the year, but to go into that environment that Lando Norris has been in for so long. He's been involved in it for 8 seasons. It's his 7th season in Formula One. But to go in there and to sort your qualifying out. I mean, we take for granted, don't we, that Oscar Piastri took his first Grand Prix pole position this year. And that's the leap forward he's taken. So he goes from ticking that very necessary box to being a championship contender. No one would have thought. I mean, Max saying in Budapest, I'm not going to win another race. And then he looks like he can't lose a race. That came out of thin air. No one saw that coming at all. And then suddenly Lando is hitting the form of his life at the most important time. So I found it completely surprising from start to finish.
Because the races haven't always, and I don't like saying this because obviously our job is to big up the sport, but the Sundays haven't always been the most exciting of days. We go to tracks that don't always generate the great racing. But the storylines throughout, I mean, you know, talking back to the start of the season, I think we all agree with you on the Norris front. But I also expected Ferrari to be much more in the hunt, given how they ended last season. Lewis Hamilton in the seat as well. It's just been a season of what is going on?
Yeah, and if you consider that if they could run that Ferrari as low to the ground as they wanted to, they wouldn't finish. They'd finish with a hole in the car every week, but it would be so effective. And so for them to be, I mean, can you imagine the odds you would have got at the start of the year on Kimi Antonelli? He's on the podium. So is Hulk. So is Hadjar, and Lewis Hamilton isn't. Yeah. It would have been in the millions. So it has been really surprising. And yeah, back to your point that like you get some years where the racing is thrill a minute and you don't get a championship battle sometimes. And then you get years where it's more of a slow burn, but you have these fantastic narratives and you get this wonderful... I think it's turned into an epic, but purely because any other season with a 24-point lead, we'd be going, Lando Norris is going to win the World Championship. But you have to look at, well, Oscar's led it for 15 rounds. Max apparently cannot be stopped no matter where he starts on the grid. And you're just having to watch what unfolds in front of you rather than make any predictions. But yeah, unbelievably painful for Ferrari to go from 14 points off the Constructors' Championship to then have public infighting, which feels like a strange sentence out loud, but you know what I mean.
Let's ask you about those John Elkann comments. Because John Elkann has told the drivers to talk less, and it feels counterintuitive, I would say.
Pretty good, those drivers, aren't they? One of the best qualifiers in the history of Formula One, and the man who leads every stat in every column. So, I'm not sure. Not sure it's down to them. Put it as succinctly as that.
Ben, you and I have talked a lot on this podcast about how at Red Bull, the change that's come in under Laurent Mekies, one of the things he's done is really emphasise listening to Max Verstappen more, almost over the data. And Ferrari, like you say, Alex, to his credit, Verstappen just can't stop getting in the way of the McLarens and putting himself in the title fight. You know, Red Bull have been resurgent since Mekies came in, and they've changed their tack, and now they're listening more to their driver. And Ferrari are going in the opposite direction, but so is their performance. And you sort of want to say to them, do I need to hold a mirror up to you? Or, like, do you not, or maybe should I just invite you next door? Or like, what do you not understand about how this sport works? It's not just about the machine; it's also about the man.
Yeah, it's. I mean, I was going to say. I mean, it's kind of Elkinn's comments. It's kind of looking where blame is put, isn't it? And you know, he very much publicly came out and supported Fred Vasseur. So who else is he looking at? And all of a sudden, he's now pinpointed his drivers. I'm not sure that's the right thing to do, but it's a really interesting scenario. And you know, we were talking about this at Bec about, excuse me, we were talking about this, about the disappointment with Ferrari, and just sort of one week you have a good week and then a bad week, and that doesn't really bode very well for 2026, and just giving an ultimate, you know, confidence boost finishing this year going into a new season. So how do you see it playing out, Alex? What do you think is going to happen next year?
They need a fast start. By the time they're in the press conference for the Bahrain test, which is almost like a full spec Grand Prix weekend, just without the race, just the unlimited running. Yeah. That is always the moment. So we'll get to the lunch break, and then I'll switch the channel in my commentary box, and I'll watch the press conference, and you can just tell the body language immediately. And if the Ferrari body language is negative, then I think we are in for what we've seen in the past, and that will be another run of management changes. I don't think that's the right approach to take. I think they've got someone in Fred Vasseur who is a racer through and through, who got them 14 points away through allowing them to take risks. But sometimes you take risks and it doesn't play out. Let's look at Red Bull's approach. We were talking about that. Setup led, go with the driver's feedback sometimes over the data. Sometimes that's going to get you an amazing run of results and get you back in the World Championship. And sometimes you're knocked out in Q1 on pure pace. Got to live by the sword and die by the sword. And unfortunately, the risks that Ferrari took with the car at the start of the year have led them to this season of waiting for next year. But we'll know very, very early on whether the drivers, and it's a very open, rule set for 2026. And so it is possible to get it right and take a massive leap forward, and it is possible to miss the mark by a long, long way, and therefore lock yourselves into a couple of tough years.
Behrman to replace Hamilton?
To be honest, we're all asking that because he has scored 4 points finishes in a row, and Lewis is not having a very easy season. But I think even if that hadn't been happening, I think that was always the plan anyway. I think Behrman has always been destined for that seat whenever Lewis chooses to end his career. It's just accelerated because of that unbelievable drive in Mexico that he put together, where I know it's tricky to overtake around that racetrack, but you know that's a driver that in the first half of the season was statistically the worst qualifier on the grid, then fending people off in a dry race without a safety car, without a late safety car. That was very impressive, and he's repaying the faith that the Haas team have put in him, because his second Formula 2 year was nothing short of a nightmare. And you'd be like, right, where's Ollie? He's P16, and you know he's not. You know that it was difficult to commentate on. And the stat I kept, someone called me out at the end of the year, and they were like, can you stop mentioning that he's a 4-time winner for his rookie season and start talking about his second season? And I was thinking, but his second season is a nightmare. I really don't want to talk about it. And the guy's got an F1 chance. So yeah, it was painful, that second F2 year, and I'm so glad that he was able to endure that and get to F1, because he's been magic, and I do think his future will eventually, not as early as some of the speculation, but eventually end up in Ferrari red.
I agree.
Do you think Lewis will win his 8th title?
That you got to row it all the way back. Lewis has got to start getting. I mean, the thing for me is, the new rule set gives. He's just not got on with this era of car, has he?
No.
If you look at the fact that, I think this is correct. I think he's taken 1 pole position in this rule set, and if you consider what George Russell has done the entire time, I think it's Budapest 2023, the only time in this modern ground effect era that he's taken a pole position in the entire time we've had these rules. Now, obviously, mitigating circumstances, and he's won races in that time, but that's just lacking a core speed that he's always had. These new cars will be fundamentally different in the way that they work, and I think millions of fans around the world will hope that we can see some of the Lewis of old, because the title is a million miles away. Can he get back to regularly competing for wins? That's got to be the aim in 2026.
I'm curious how you're going to bring this new era into Formula One and explain it to fans, because this is the biggest change that the sport's ever had, isn't it? It's engine and chassis both changing at the same time. So it really has the potential to mix things up. But how do you go about explaining that to fans? Do you class this as a new era?
Yeah, I think it will be. The start of 26, we'll see that as a totally different. And we refer to the different eras, don't we? We go back and different stages across the decades. It will be the same task that it always is with Formula One, which is taking something very, very complex and making it hopefully as obvious as possible. And I do think there's actually a nice opportunity with it as well, because the amount of times I say DRS and think we've got so many new viewers, and I've only got time to say DRS, and you don't want to explain drag reduction system every week and it's been around forever. I think it's actually a really nice chance, hopefully, for the terminology to be accessible for someone watching their first race or someone who's watched all of them.
Oh my goodness. I mean, we've been saying this for years, Bec, haven't we, about how stop allowing engineers to give terms to Formula One, elements. I mean, what was it? The dual axis steering. Do you remember that? The DAS system that Mercedes had? I remember being in pre-season testing and just losing all hope that we'll be able to convey this to the readers at the time, and just thinking, stop making it so difficult, But let's hope this is a new chance to sort of make things a bit more straightforward for people.
Speak English.
Yeah, I mean I agree entirely, and there are so many things where I'm like, let's just make it obvious that let's have the old Murray Walker rule. Can you make it work for a seasoned fan and a 10-year-old watching at home? If it doesn't satisfy that criteria, let's have another go at the terminology.
Yeah,
Agree. Absolutely
agree. Let's bring it back to the end of this year. As I say, 3 races to go. Who is your money on for the championship?
Oh, I'm keeping my money in my pocket because if you'd asked me that after Zandvoort, I'd have lost an absolute pile. If you'd asked me after Austin, I'd have lost an absolute pile. I mean, Max Verstappen was the bookmaker's favourite after the US Grand Prix.
Yeah.
So I honestly don't know. The thing is, I was looking at the temperatures for Vegas.
Ooh, cold.
And I did think that Brazil was going to be our last outlier. And said that on air. So that's good. That's committed to the broadcast, isn't it? But I did think that the rain was going... Because you can get a driver spin out like we saw with Piastri. And you know that they're going to be fairly evenly packed together in the dry. If that had been a dry race and a normal 3 practice weekend, I think you would have had Verstappen, Norris, Piastri, the top 3 comfortably. Obviously, the format changes that. But if the temperatures are as low as currently predicted, and there's some even, I know it's a long way away, but there's some rain forecast as well, then suddenly you have no idea what that's going to look like, because that is a street circuit and then some, especially the braking zone at the end of the strip. That is a complete outlier. And you have hilarious, I mean, I loved Pierre Gasly's answer about the Alpine. He's like, yeah, we're really quick and we don't know why. So we're at the end of the rule cycle. All there is to know about the cars is known. They're not developing them anymore. And it's like, yeah, we don't know why we're rapid. Might just be my talent kind of thing, which was such a good answer from him. But equally, that could happen in Vegas. Ferrari are always quick there because it's straight lines and short corners. Yeah. So Ferrari will be back in the mix. It means that the potential for a point swing is enormous again. And therefore, whilst Lando is obviously the heavy favourite to win his first title, I don't think you can be certain. And then I think if it's in his hands, he's got an advantage of over 14 points over 15 points going into the last 2, then I think he will be able to see it out. But Vegas is the final banana skin, if you like.
And we haven't mentioned them, but Mercedes go well in the cold, and George Russell has had an unbelievable season. He's kind of flown a bit under the radar because he's win here or there and, not in the championship fight, but he has had a brilliant season. Antonelli's obviously just finally had a good weekend. They do like the cold weather, so I think they could be mixing things up for McLaren as well.
Yeah, I think again, the fast speed and short corners should help the Mercedes. I don't know entirely if everyone's happy about their cars over the bumps, even this late into the rule set. So you don't know who's going to be in good form and who's not. But Antonelli's actually coming on really, really well in the second half of the year. And George Russell's Singapore win was built on looking across the garage at Antonelli's data and improving to that pole position, which goes a long way to winning you a Grand Prix at the moment. So had to copy his teammates' homework. Very, very strong weekend in Brazil. And it turns out with Antonelli, if he's never been to a circuit, that boy is rapid. Yeah. If he's gone to them before, I don't know whether the calibration in his head doesn't work, but you give that guy a low grip circuit he's not visited, and he is the real deal. So if he can continue that momentum on, we all expect Mercedes to be quick next year. We'll be saying George Russell has had a great season, but what about that end of year? If Antonelli could pinch the win, for example, in Vegas, it becomes a slightly different summary of the season for Mercedes, doesn't it?
Yeah, and it is that motivation, isn't it, going into the next year. And I think that's what we saw, didn't we, with Nico Rosberg on his championship year. It was about momentum and taking it forward into the next year. But I think this is, you're right, it's shaping up for a good end of the season with Mercedes. And, what we're hearing about 26 is that the engine and package is all strong. And based on history, it's looking pretty good for them at the moment.
Do you think we've asked this question of each other with the McLaren pair? Do you think Norris and Piastri would rather Verstappen won the title over the other side of the garage?
Yeah. Every single driver I have ever met would say no, they want their team to win the title. But in reality, look, they're all thoroughly nice people out of the car. And I'm amazed at how patient they are given the demands on them. And yes, they get paid millions of pounds and they get flown around the world in nice parts of the plane or sometimes their own plane. But they are constantly in demand all the time. And they'd give you a media-trained answer. But yeah, you do not want to lose the championship to someone on the other side of the garage. And It was looking very, very painful for Lando for a large part of this year. It's currently looking painful for Oscar, and Max can swing for the fences. It doesn't matter if he's out in Q1 because they can try something different and he can go again because he knows it's such an unlikely chance. But yeah, they would much rather Max took the title if they didn't take it.
What have you made of the papaya rules and the team orders coming out of McLaren this year? And to commentate on them as well, because obviously you're going to have an opinion, but when you're commentating, you can't give that.
Yeah, that's one of the key rules I have in the box, is that the opinion comes from Jolien and David. And it has to, because they've been there and done that, and that's the expert. I'm very much there to say the order and give the backstory. I think realistically, you should only be giving your opinion as lead if it's unsafe or unfair. That said, I think a lot has been made of it because that's been sometimes the only narrative on offer. I can see why after Monza, Oscar would feel like he'd bought into a code that maybe hadn't been followed. I mean, if it's literally a set of rules defined and slow pit stops aren't in there, and then you ask him to swap it over, and you've got to make a decision. And go back to what David said on air in Budapest 2024. You spend a long time thinking about it in the car, and then you spend a long time thinking about it afterwards. And that can affect a driver way more, because when it's an inter-team battle, when those relationships have existed for a really long time. Like Zach Brown was involved in Lando Norris's career way before he was joining that team. So you can't help but have human. This is the great thing about Formula One. There's a human at the centre of all of it. You can't help but wonder, well, why have they? Well, it wasn't on the list, and then Singapore happens, and yeah, I think I can understand though, and I will say in defence of this, Andrea Stella has had to come off the pit wall as a race engineer in the past, having lost a last race title decider. And I think that affects things way more than you could possibly imagine. And I think especially the way that the title slipped away from Ferrari, Stella and Alonso in 2010, I think informs a lot of what we've seen this year. Because that was a particularly painful one. It took him a long time to go to Abu Dhabi and take a title home. They're not easily won, and so I think that's why the more extreme end of the management has existed. That said, Oscar slipping back with form, these are tracks where he didn't go particularly well the previous year. Oscar being slightly further away has taken away the element that is always true of team orders. Eventually, there's nothing you can do. Eventually, if the big prize is on the line, they are going to make contact with each other. And strangely, the loss of form has meant that they haven't had that problem. But yeah, I can see why Stella has taken that approach to 2025.
Yeah, it's saved them a bit of a headache, hasn't it? The dip in form for Oscar. So I was excited to see how it was all going to shape up, but we've been denied that a little bit. But it's still been a great season, as you were saying earlier on.
Okay, Alex, to finish, we like to do a bit of a quick fire round. So, are you ready?
I am ready.
Okay, here we go. Don't think about it, just tell us. Favourite F1 driver?
Mika Hakkinen.
Which team has the best hospitality?
I like McLaren.
Okay. What's your favourite track?
Atmosphere at Monza wins it for Monza.
Favourite pizza topping?
Ooh, any. At all times.
Favourite restaurant anywhere in the world?
Ooh, favourite restaurant anywhere in the world? There's a lovely one called Bec Ben, which I went for my first anniversary with my wife. Lovely French restaurant, beautiful building. I'll go for that one.
Okay, good choice. And
That's the
safe,
right answer.
safe bet getting your wife in, I was going to say. Well done. This is a real F1 question. Favourite airline?
Oh, favourite airline that's the most controversial thing you've asked me. I'm going to go for, who are F1 sponsored by? Think about it. Qatar. I got out of jail.
Well done. Still in a job next season. Beer or wine?
Beer.
Favourite part of the F1 weekend?
The moments before lights out.
And the best thing you've done in F1?
The best thing I've done in F1 is be allowed to wander into a commentary box and talk for 10 years.
All right, brilliant. Alex
Very nice.
Jacques, thank you very much. The voice of F1 TV and Channel 4, and also the author of the brilliant new book, Grid to Glory. Thank you, Alex.
Thanks for having me, guys. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Yeah. That was fun.
A special thank you to Alex for joining myself and Ben in this edition of Inside the Piranha Club. If you have enjoyed this podcast, please do rate and review us. It really does mean a lot to us. If there's anything in particular you've enjoyed or anything you don't particularly agree with in Alex's book, please do drop us a line on our Instagram and on our Facebook at Inside the Piranha Club. We are also on YouTube with the same handle. We will be back next week for Las Vegas, where we will be doing our preview show as always. And if you have any suggestions of people you would like us to interview, we would always love to listen to them. But until next time, thank you very much for listening.